You're listening to the Devil Dog Talk Show.
This show contains explicit material and is recommended for ages 18 and older for mature audiences only. But hey, it's the internet.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Devil Dog Talk Show on this glorious day, rainy day here in sunny San Diego, but not rainy over there where Jason is in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, the People's Republic of Brooklyn, right? Did I say that right? Did I nail it?
You got it. You got it.
Yeah. So we got Jason E. Starr, the Chief Impact Officer of On the Revel. And I'm just going to let Jason kind of take the lead here and introduce himself, give us a little bit of history. So Jason, please take over.
What's up? What's up? Well, thank you so much, Joey, for having me, and to all the Devil Dog listeners out there. My name is Jason Starr. I am a resident of Brooklyn, New York. I've been here for about 17 years. So New York is home, but I'm a child of the South. I grew up in South Carolina, in old cotton country, as we call it. I grew up in an old textile town in York County, South Carolina. So my grandfather and all of his family were farmers. And so I grew up, I'm definitely a person of the earth. But I had city boy tendencies. So I moved to Miami, Florida for college, had a great time at the University of Miami. I tell people I really majored in leadership and community engagement. And I think that those are two things that have really been guideposts in my career. Spent some time as a classroom teacher. Shout out to all the educators. I think some of the nation's frontline civil rights workers, if you ask me. So cut my teeth really learning about working with people in community in the classroom. And then migrated north like so many other Black folks, just much, much later than that great migration from the South to the North. And came to New York and went to law school here and really just fell in love with becoming a civil rights lawyer and policy advocate and mixing it up here in New York City. And always a great place for me to keep learning. And I like to say I have beginner's eyes and my mind is eternally curious. And so New York's as good a place as any to keep writing new chapters in my life. So
that's beautiful. Way to take it, just literally down a nice path of introduction. I really enjoy that. I'm like visualizing. I'm a very mentally visual person. So I was like, wow, Miami must have been beautiful. And then, going to law school in New York. It's a different experience. So I like putting I guess myself in other people's shoes to kind of not just listen, but to be like, wow, that. It must have been a very interesting path because you bring up, a lot of historical context with equity and Black communities and cultures, and then transitioning from the South to the North. That was a huge shift back in the day, right? And to be able to lead where you're at now with On the Revel. Which took me a long time to get right because I kept on wanting to saying on the level, and I'm like, am I saying it wrong?
I think our community gives us everything from on the level to on the Revel and everything in between. So we may be working on this trademark a little bit, but OTR may be a nice little moniker to remember too.
OTR. There we go. OTR. So what got you started in advocacy for not just human rights, but civil rights? And I was reading a bit about yourself on, different communities that you've helped litigate certain things, policy reform. What got you started in that aspect of law?
It's a good question because it really goes back to like value system growing up. I mean, I feel like I can't go back and point to a point in time in which I just had this like strong sense of unfairness. Mm-hmm. And like beyond that, like my responsibility or place to do something about it. Definitely I get the like service like orientation, if you will, from my mom. She was like a Girl Scout troop leader. I mean, we grew up pretty poor, although I don't think we really knew it, because it can be poor in one way, right? Like poor in money, but rich in so many others. And we were rich in so many like other ways. We just didn't have money, but we always had something to give. And yeah, my mom, and she still does this. I mean, she just never. There's no situation where she can't figure out a way to try to like help someone in need or like end human suffering. So like that core value just comes from like family, but then also this idea about that like I position myself to fight it. Maybe it's just the compassion plus the fact that I love to argue and be right, and I hate bullying. I hate seeing people who are being taken advantage of because they don't have, they're outmatched or out-resourced. And one way I knew that I could level the playing field, if you will, was my brain, right? Like I was like, okay, I can read these books. I can understand this piece of like a power element, and get this kind of education. So I kind of it was kind of written in the stars, if you will, in some ways.
Nice.
But yeah, but as I started to like go to school and get more educated and kind of sort of understand the way the world works, in many ways, I think for me, I'm just curious about learning ways in which we can utilize the law and policy to improve like people's lives and make our communities work better. And I do have an inherent value that like human beings are oriented towards like taking care of themselves and each other. Government and power get in the way sometimes. So I think I have a good sense of like, how we can utilize the law and the structure that we're in to do some good for people, when I think a lot of times it works harm to so many people. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I really, really do. I wish I didn't, I think everybody that goes through it, I wish we didn't, and then when you actually need an advocate or a lawyer to kind of, repeating words here, but to advocate for yourself, right? To assist in that process of whether it is, entrepreneurship, to guide yourself through a now legal cannabis market, especially for the culture and the Black community. It must be very difficult to see yourselves as a potential entrepreneur in a field that people were getting sent away for 20 plus years. You know what I mean? I'd be timid. I'd be a little bit nervous to, broach my way into a cannabis entrepreneurial culture, new business, right? Without any guidance or legal guide. And not just that, in the sense of being a veteran, right? I wish I didn't know that aspect of, like you brought up, governments, authorities, right? Policies and bureaucracies. It's never a fun day.
Right. And I mean, and even if we take, if we assume like best intent, right? Like government, and institutions generally, but let's just use government, right? Don't really work for the diversity of people who need it to work for them, right? Like government expects you to contort yourself to the way that it's structured, when in reality, like we are just whole people, right? Like if you're a veteran and you need like healthcare services, but you also need other kinds or different kinds of like social support services, but you also need employment counseling. Like you'll spend your entire, day, week, month, year trying to just navigate where do you need to go to get the things that your and my tax dollars are actually paying for. So part of it is like, how do we make our institutions see people as they are and not make people see them as they are? Mm-hmm. And actually like utilize things that were actually built and resourced for a particular purpose. Like that's step one. before we even get to like how we need to like change the structures in order for policy and law to work in our favor, step one is just like, how do we get this massive thing that we're paying for to service us and work for us actually be responsive so that it reaches all of the people that it claims to intend to want to reach in the first instance.
Yeah. No, you said that honestly, like just perfectly. I am honestly, I'm like, okay, look, you clearly are very well informed on what veterans go through, or you're very well informed on what it is people go through anytime they engage with the government. And it's just kind of comical to me because you nailed it right on the head. Like for instance, I bring up the budget of the VA. It's around $400 billion annually. I'll round up. It's okay if we're spending a lot of other billions in other ways, right? And in that, the efficacy is really, I'm not one to bash the VA 100% all the time. But when you have the level of which we see people behave in a manner that is not conducive to the true intent of the organization, right? Like you nailed it right on the head with that intention of the law, right? And one of the programs I love talking about is called the Comprehensive Caregiver Program. It's one of the most vital programs for severely disabled veterans of all genres. They opened up the entire aspect of warfares, different wars. It doesn't matter which war you went through, and if you even did combat, stuff like that. But it pays for a in-house either family member, spouse, friend, or whatever the circumstance is, to help these veterans with their daily living, what do they call them? ADLs, assisted daily living. I don't know. They got a lot of stuff in this program. But a lot of it has been changed through that very, very word, the intent of the law. And so it's very intriguing that you said that. And I'm like, man, a lot of these groups and communities of veterans, and I think the diversities of different cultures in that, which I bring up because this caregiver program was rejecting and denying, or I should say, removing and rejecting African-American veterans at a rate of 20% more than any other demographic. So it's very intriguing, right? Like, how can we have that disparity of such a very unique demographic, right? We're talking about the most vulnerable, most severely disabled veterans that need continued assisted living, essentially with their spouses or family members or whoever is assisting. And the program changes a few words and then starts kicking these people off the program under the guise of making it better, right? But after 4 years of going back and forth with Senator Tester, I think it is, or Congressman Tester, I don't know the titles. I'm not good at this stuff, okay? I know the last name.
That guy Tester.
That guy. They're doing a great job talking about it, but there's no change. So like you're saying, in a lot of aspects with governance and bureaucracy, right? You are forced to semper gumby is what we say in the Marine Corps and the Navy when we're attached to Marines. And it's always be flexible, right? But there becomes a point where you can't be flexible anymore, right? Because now you've become too malleable. You have no more core value, no more core beliefs or any foundational identity or sensation of validation. There's just an absolute zero. and it's painful. Another gentleman we did a great interview with, he's a huge advocate for psychedelic medications and the expansion of veterans and veterans affairs. Name's Wiz Buckley. Really great guy, really great gentleman. And he talks about it in the sense that he was a Top Gun pilot, right? Super cool, really, Tom Cruise level cool job. People are well aware of, what pilots do or don't do. And when he got out, his personal experience with the VA, and I'm not saying it was, but he made it seem as though, was that they are essentially treating you as if you're coming to them with a bag full of lies. You know what I mean? And there's no way around it. Where other services and other departments of, I would say this social equity type of stuff, I wouldn't even say it's not, a benefit or an entitlement. When you become injured in warfare or in service to this country, the way I see it, it's slightly legally different than, let's just help random homeless people, right? Which is also important to do. Then the morality issues come in, right? Where you're being questioned, you're being minimized, disregarded to the extent of what? What do you become? So what has been your experience when you litigate such a large, I would say, system or mechanism, and how do you approach that? Like, how do you maintain your demeanor? I think that's really what I'm trying to ask. Like, how do you behave well, when you get frustrated or when you're in these circumstances?
Well, I mean, it's the law, right, is I think folks are getting increasingly frustrated because the fact that it is just a part of the bigger political gamesmanship. I think it's always been the case, but I think it's becoming just more apparent, to folks. I think if you are, I went to law school. And I practiced for over 15 years, right? But the average person, the law is like complicated unnecessarily. There's all these big words, these Latin words that nobody actually really uses. And
Exactly.
And there's this sense that the law, which is just like the agreed upon set of norms that we govern ourselves by, is this thing that like you have to go to law school and get this sort of elite education in order to be able to sort of talk to and make sense of. And it's all just gatekeeping, right? Like, I think it's just all being exposed as a bunch of gatekeeping, because the law is premised on like norms of like what's right and wrong. And we deal with that as human beings all the time. We deal with it in our families. We deal with it in our community spaces. We deal with it involuntarily in our workplaces because we have to be there, by and large, right? So we, like, non-lawyers, right? These people who are not a part of this like highfalutin profession, and got all these degrees, deal with and engage with like the underbelly, right, of law all the time. It's just that the practice of law has been sort of put aside in an ivory tower, and it's only done by certain people. So I think the frustration with a lot of things when it comes to like how does the law do equity, is really frustrating, because I think a lot of folks who want to maintain the status quo have done a good job at co-opting the institutions that do law, the courts, the judges, like so on and so forth. And so people are sort of like, okay, the jig is up.
Yeah.
And so it can be really like frustrating, because you have a lot of like people who teach law. We call them the legal academy, those people. They're like freaking out, these law professors, like, oh my God, who am I? What do I do? I can't teach anymore. And it's like, actually, you can actually just deal with the reality, which is, law is always made in the context of politics. And so understanding like it, is just another function of the like political machinery, and then sort of understanding what it can and cannot do, I think is always been a part of the game. So for me, the way that I practice, I think, kind of lends itself to that, which is, I've always been a grassroots kind of lawyer, which is to say, I go into change ecosystems. I'm invited in, right? Like, I'm a part of communities, folks who are fighting for change from a lot of different vantage points. Even yourself, Joey, like someone who utilizes the media to raise issues, to like talk to people, to do political education, whether it's like intentional or not, right? Like, the platform is activating a community around issues affecting them, veterans. So So for me, it's just like, how do I, as a lawyer, add to that mix, right? Like, what does my training do? Like, what does my experience do? Like, what does knowledge of this system actually do in a bigger like change ecosystem, which I think is great in like cannabis, for example, because people are like, oh, well, like you're going to get sued for this, you're going to get sued for that. And it's like, oh, yeah, we're going to get sued for everything. It's like a Mack truck. We can see it coming, right? But here's an opportunity for us to play around with ways. Two things. One is, how do we build an agency, like a new state agency that maybe it is oriented towards dealing with people in a different way? What can we learn about the way in which like services can be delivered based on the actual people who we built to receive them? That's a new opportunity 9 times out of 10 when you talk about legalization and how the state's going to do that. And then we get to play around with all these policies and programs that that lawyers can kind of create guardrails around and tell you, like, this is how far you can go. This is what could happen in court when that happens. Here's how we defend it. And so we still have the pen on that stuff. And so I get frustrated because I know that we're being irrationally and illogically constrained by laws that are really just like tools for folks who have power to maintain it. But I also think that like you can never take the function of norming away from the people. And as long as we keep ourselves connected to them and keep them activated, like we can keep pressing the boundaries of what the law could actually mean. So I think that's true in my cannabis practice. It's true across like all my work in large part.
That's amazing, because it is true. It is super frustrating to, I would say, hit brick walls, and, technicalities are thrown in people's faces where ignorance is bliss, but it also kills, I believe, especially when you're participating in political gamesmanship. I loved how you said that, man. It's like the perfect term. I'm going to be using that a lot more from now on. I am, because it removes the self, right? And what I'm hearing you explain how you practice is you're habitually going into a place of dissonance, right? Of friction, which is the courthouse, which is litigation and all that stuff. It's nerve-wracking for me to even think about it, right? But the part of that is that exposure therapy. That's how I see life sometimes, right? If you don't go out for a walk, you're gonna become agoraphobic. I've gone through those phases of all that stuff, right? Everything that veterans go through and just disabled persons go through, trying to, again, behave in a society with well-established norms. You nailed it. Like, I can't believe we're having this type of conversation within regard to my own personal experience. Like, I literally been talking all week about this with counselors and my therapist, my wife. Like, well, I am at a crux. I'm at a frustration point. I'm at a pressure point with life at points, right? At terms. And it comes to the basis of engaging within a society where there's well-established norms. And then I go to operate within that normal behavior. And then there's this odd occurrence, just random, and it's consistent. It's consistent over time with me. My wife says I have it's either the worst luck or the best luck, depending on how you look at it. But I think you would agree it's good luck, because you said it just a moment ago. When you approach a problem, and you yourself, said it very nicely there, where you approach a problem and you can instill these, guides and these boundaries, and how do you break down the concepts of how they're going to, sue you, and how you, prepare a package. And essentially what you're saying to me was the same experience I had applying for benefits in general. Like, you had to come with a strategy. You had to have tactics, right? A strategist like yourself, and you had to approach it in a manner of poise and collection, where you can't be frustrated. I've had security guards walk into my medical appointment with hands on their weapons because I seemed a little bit angry when I was responding with my doctor. And I'm like, oh, like this is serious. They're not playing. They don't care what you're going through. There's no, like there's no empathy towards the people we're really trying to, get help to. And those critical issues, I find that, man, you're man, you're fucking nailing it. Like, I mean, you're clearly great at your job. I wish we could have talked 12 years ago. Right?
Well, that's a little bit of the theory behind On the Revel too. I started on the government side, actually. I mean, I started way back in doing cannabis policy work through stop and frisk, like policing work. I was a baby lawyer here, working at the ACLU of New York, and that was the energy in New York City specifically. It really expanded statewide. In 2011 and 12 and 13, there were big cases that challenged the practice of stop, question, and frisk in New York City, which had gotten really, out of control and was really just a proxy for racially motivated discriminatory policing. And so there were these big lawsuits that were being litigated. There was a huge community effort that had come together and become like well organized and funded. So a lot of coordinated energy, and there was legislation in the city council. So kind of all levels of government being affected. So that's kind of how I cut my teeth in, sort of being a community lawyer in and around New York City. And the cannabis story really told itself through like all of the data. So all of these, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stops. And so we could talk about how cannabis prohibition and enforcement really drove so many of those stops. And there had been a collective acceptance, right? I mean, this is around the time when Washington State and Colorado, of course, California had a much longer history, but there was just starting to be a broader national acceptance of that cannabis enforcement was a waste of money and unnecessary. And so, we started doing like municipal decriminalization stuff, getting prosecutors to deprioritize cannabis enforcement. But really all that ground energy was building towards like the first real effort to to legalize in New York. The first bill got put in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So that was, so that's sort of my trajectory for the first couple of years. And then I had this unique opportunity to go inside of state government, which I, tell people I went kicking and screaming, but the strategy there was like, somebody's got to go inside there and figure out the ways in which like our allies in there always seem to drop the ball right before we get to the finish line, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to be an emissary, for 2 years, get a master class in the sausage making and come back out. I didn't realize that the political environment would change so much. I tell people I accepted the job on election day 2016 before we found out who was going to be the new president. And I started 4 days after Trump's inauguration as the chief counsel for civil rights in New York State. So like, I'm like you, man. It just seems I just find myself in these wild circumstances. Like, okay, the first assignment I ever got from the governor was the Muslim travel ban. I just got a phone call 4 days in, and he was like, "Okay, so what's New York State's response?" And I was like, "I don't even know where the bathroom is, homie." Like, like I was watching this shit on CNN, and now like I'm in the arena. But so I got a chance to do cannabis stuff, from that vantage point, and so yeah, I mean, like I learned about Revel in the context of trying to connect with people. Like I was the person with power, and I was like, how do we open up these doors and bring in constituencies and communities that need to inform our public policy? And when it came to cannabis, Revel was the only sort of folks organizing potential entrepreneurs, existing legacy market folks. Like the advocates had a really strong coalition, but it was advocates. There were criminal justice advocates and economic development advocates, but no one who were like, who are the people who are actually running the shit now?
Yeah.
Like, who are the people actually trying to transition into? And I met Jacoby and Lulu, and they were like, yo, would you speak at one of our events? And I was like, I'm leaving government. Andrew Cuomo can't do anything to me now. So sure. Um, uh, and it was just perfect. It was like, I was like, this is a big missing piece of the grassroots puzzle that we've been missing. And I just love the ingenuity and thoughtfulness. I mean, they had no idea they were organizing. They were just kind of like
trying their best.
Yeah, they were just like, we were in Oregon, we were in Washington. We kind of saw stuff out there from the ground up, and we saw what was missing when it came to like a necessary space for those kinds of stakeholders to find each other and to build power. I mean, they didn't have that kind of analysis, but that's what they were doing. So we just kind of fell in love, friendship love, if you will. Myself, Jacoby, Peter. It just we were just like, oh, these are people that I was supposed to meet, and yeah, they're it's good right now for the function I'm in, but we're going to be friends. And so when I left government, just kept a connection, and not to toot my own horn, but I had so much exposure. People are like, oh, what do you want to do in cannabis? Like, you can come work for me, come work for me, come work for me. I mean, I'm a civil rights lawyer by day. So Revel became like my cannabis home because for me, my place in the industry right now is to continue to like build a bridge between government and the agency and the communities I think are still at risk of getting left out, to close the knowledge gap. So I think that's an important consequence of prohibition that we can't forget. I think financial capital and that kind of stuff is really critical to these entrepreneurs, but closing the knowledge gap is important to everybody. And it's a big piece of how the industry is going to be successful, because it's not just consumers and potential entrepreneurs that are going to make up this industry. It's everyone in this beautiful city and state. So we also got to make sure that the consequences of prohibition that have been written on their psyche, that we respond to them too, so that they're not afraid, so that they start to see cannabis as something that can be integrated into everyday pieces of civic life, and that like industry stakeholders and leaders recognize that we also need to build an industry that's responsible and responsive to like our local ecosystem. So like that's a lot of the work that I do at Revel, is really trying to think about like, what does this industry need to be like really successful over the long term here? Because if it is, then it means that those entrepreneurs, those folks we fought for, the people who are going to get those community reinvestment grants, that we can make good on that promissory note, because we have a good, strong industry that exists alongside so many other great industries in the city and state.
That's amazing. And it's going to be fortified, and the foundation's going to be built off of, like you said, that closing of that knowledge gap, where it's critical. And I find that so valuable to piggyback on right now, because it is critical and in general terms of anything that's changing, right? When things change, it's going to take time. I mean, for Christ's sake, it took 2,000 years to go from geocentrism, cosmology, those are words, where you think you think the world is the center of the universe, right? And then it took 2,000 years, and this dude named Kepler, and some things were observed, and then he was like, wait a minute, it's heliocentric cosmology, folks. It's actually centered around the sun. And then as we're moving through and actually looking more and more at it, we're learning not only is it that we're shooting through space in this weird entanglement of just flow and gravity and this beautiful things we call stars and universes and galaxies. It's gorgeous out there, people, right? But also inward, we're learning a tremendous amount of the human spirit, the human experience, ancient medicines. Let's be honest, dude. Weed's been around for some time. I'm pretty sure Jesus smoked it. Okay, I'm not trying to offend people, but let's just be honest. All right?
Yeah.
He straight up
Yeah.
says every fruit bearing seed, and let me tell you what, flowers are gorgeous fruits, and you could bear them seeds, and you can roll them, and you can dry them. And there's rose petal blunts nowadays, brother. I didn't even know you could smoke rose petals, which is a cool, interesting thing, right? And then when you bring it into legislation, like you did, the when you're actually talking to this authority, right? Not only you're bridging gaps, but it's the authority has to be welcoming and approachable, because if it's not, then you just have dissonance and confrontation and frustration. And so I love how you brought up previously, bringing in the conversation piece in an approachable way, where we're bridging these gaps, not only, between the end users or the consumers or the producers, but legislatively, where we're shoring up that back end, and we're protecting people in the long term, and we're shifting the group think of societal normatives within the law terms, right? Which you said, and it really rung my bell. These are norms established by society, the people, right? And I do believe in that foundation of the founding fathers, that government was the only thing meant to be restrained, not people. You know what I mean? And to me, I see that the way that even governances and bureaucracies and policy reforms and the conversation is more of a supplication, a rattling of the can, a begging, the little Timmy, asking the Scrooge, give me some change, sir. And then they look down on you, and you're like, wait, why are we talking it from the perspective of us being downward from this thing we're supposed to be involved with, right? Like if it's education, cannabis, if it's farming, if it's opening up, veterans affairs, they removed it through this new approval thingy, approving for cannabis, or at least recommending cannabis for veterans to pursue in that state that is legal, right? And I go back and forth with it, and it's going to be a very long time before we see the largest federal agency within healthcare pivot and support something as amazing as cannabis, because of the special interest groups. And then you brought up a word that I learned recently: shareholders. Who the fuck are those people? Right? What do you mean there's inside trading and, closed doors and shareholder? Who the fucking shareholder? I thought I was supposed to be the guy that, we care about, the veteran, right? The person that's asking for the help. No, we got to talk to our shareholders first and see what they think. And I'm like, well, how do I talk to a shareholder? And then that's when I learned about CFR codes and the way that the legal process is actually opened. And, you have a period of commenting and questioning and hearing out and lobbying and all this crazy shit. And I'm like, wait a minute. So the disabled guy is supposed to pull his shit together, get into a room where all these people are wearing suits and act appropriate with right words, not cuss and not be, triggered or engaged in a moment of anxiety. No, where's this expectation, right? And you brought it up with the stop and frisk, which was something I relate it back to a Nazi Germany. I'm not gonna steer away from that. It's a hard statement, and I am very, very, very hard into it, because we have to establish normatives of historical context, right? And if you don't, and you have a behavior within any agency that has an authority to arrest a person for whatever reasons, there isn't a Fourth or Fifth Amendment that you're allowed to exercise when somebody can profile you for walking down the street. I don't agree with that at any level. And in the current circumstance, I also don't agree with right now in New York. What I've heard, you could either let me know if this has actually happened or not. But the Army Reserve or the National Guard was activated in the subways, and I'm like, wait a minute, guys, like. What's going on? Like, can we all just calm down, roll the joint?
That was that's the latest overreaction to to something that's not really um, a problem, a chronic problem, which is crime on the subway. Certainly, there's been a couple of very um, uh, high profile incidents, but I always tell people I used to be a math teacher, right? Like the denominator, if you remember your fractions, like really matters too.
No. You had to bring
There
up
may be
math.
there may be six high profile incidents in the last couple of months, but that's over like 6 million rides, right? So the reality is that the vast majority of people who are riding on New York City subways haven't and won't ever encounter incidents of random violence, if that's what this effort is supposed to perform a response to.
Yeah.
But you said something about I wanted to respond to this idea around stakeholders, shareholders,
Yeah.
and
That's
the
something I don't
government.
know.
Sort
I
of,
don't understand it still.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because even yourself, who you said now you've done some work to understand what the CFR is and find ways in which like the apparatus is designed for public engagement or input. But those things are even broken and insufficient, right? Because I think let's take the Cannabis Control Board in New York. It operates like every other agency where there's what we call the sunshine laws, right? There's freedom of information, there's an open meetings law, there's a public comment period at open meetings. But if you really pay attention, that's not a deliberative process, right? Like they've already deliberated and made determinations. They just have to vote on it in public, right? So it's the appearance of engagement. But I was just in New Orleans with a good friend of mine who was on the city council in New York for 8 years, and who now kind of thinks and writes about participatory government. And people hated him because he was like, I'm just gonna march to the beat of my own drum. Probably not gonna be a career politician because of it, but I'm gonna do this thing called co-governance, and I'm gonna put these big decisions that I have the power to make a determination about, particularly in New York, like rezoning, right? So some developer wants to redevelop property, and they need the city to rezone, and they're going to gentrify likely, and right, it's a big fight, right? Because there's so much private money coming into usually places where there's been a history of underdevelopment or underinvestment, right? So there's all these risks, right? Like lower income people being displaced, right? Folks not getting the benefit of the economic activity. It starts to feel like a gift to developers. So it's one place where the city council has a lot of power, right? So he's basically like, look, I know that normally the lobbyists are accustomed to calling on behalf of their clients, and there's this whole way of being, this dance that it's just how government works. It's just how things are done. But the people always end up getting left out of it. And anything that they get is something that some stakeholder, somebody has told them like, yo, this is the best we can get for you, or this is what we got for you. But they're not participatory, right? And so like one of the things I think we got to do to re-inspire confidence is we've got to stop thinking about our political class as people who, again, like I was talking about the law, who are doing something that you need some kind of specialized knowledge to do. People can come together and decide how they want to create norms, and then what policies they need in order to improve the quality of their lives. So we don't need to be governed, but we need a process of co-governance where the elected official is really engaged meaningfully with the broadest base of their constituents in order to make a determination about what is happening. And that isn't a transaction, but rather it's a process, right? That it doesn't happen just when there's an election. I give you my vote, you give me a promise to do certain things, but it actually represents a relationship that we are engaged in. Not because like people need to be focused on the minutia of government. Like people have to work, they have to take care of their families, they have to live and enjoy life. But just this idea that there's an open line of dialogue and communication that's open, and people have some sense that like they're being invited to be a participant in their own governance, and it's not something that's just happening to them, right?
Yeah. No, as you're saying that, right? I am interpreting it and I am, correlating it to personal experiences. You used a word I love, which is minutia. Another one I love is Gestalt, right? It's a bit harsh on the tongue. It's a German word that means all the the little things, the sum of the parts and the larger picture of its sum. It's really awesome that you're saying this, because to me, you're providing not only the avenue of approach, which is communication, but you're literally creating that solution, right? The solution to these problems we are seeing is that governance and government and bureaucracy and stakeholders are telling the people and the public, this is good enough for you, and taking a bigger piece of the pie. And I'm not saying we're going to have a let them have cake moment, right? But it feels like in society you nailed it again, man, that confidence. We're lacking confidence, and we can't have identity or belief without confidence, because then it's just a fallacy of delusion, right? It's an illusion. It's a veil. It's a thin veil, and I think the veil's getting thinner and thinner every day. When you bring in those political lefts and rights and the frustration points and the dissonance we're seeing within the populace and the new normatives of frustrations and, the boiling points, like you said, but statistically, the nation actually isn't in an uproar at all. You nailed it with saying the same thing me and my wife talk about constantly, like with veterans issues, is I hate using the word ignorance because it has a negative connotation. But if you're absolutely unaware of something, right, that's the word, okay? And if you are too preoccupied, sustaining your own existence, right? Going to work to and from with I don't even know what the inflation rates are currently, but it's difficult to do the same things we did pre-COVID, of course, but also throughout COVID, we had a very nice economic shift with pivotal technologies and different ways to associate economic prosperity, entrepreneurship, right? The human race pivoted in such a global way that I don't think we're giving ourselves enough credit. And governments and society, we're not utilizing the lessons learned the best we can, right? If we improve telemental health to the point where, or telehealth in general, where I could, beep, boop, bop, bop, and talk to a physician about my mental health right then and there over a screen, I don't have to drive, 30 minutes and go through a panic attack, or I don't have to go on a subway. I've never even been on a subway, but, other than the sandwiches, right? But, I've never been through that stressor of being on the subway. If you were to interject the current situation of the National Guard, as a veteran, I'm like, I'm not going. This is too many things are triggering my PTSD responses of saying, dude, don't move, just stay where you're at, relax, let things blow over. But things shift, and if we don't constantly build new methods while integrating the old, that worked, right? If we remove the pillars that uphold the foundation of our household, guess what? We're going to have to start all over again, right? But the foundation was engagement, follow through. It wasn't that promissory note of you give me a vote, like you said so nicely there. But, we promise so much bullshit every election cycle that it's difficult to even engage in it anymore because it's fruitless. And I'm a pretty religious guy. I believe in Jesus Christ and stuff, but I also believe in the message that he wrote and all the things that he said was, if it's not bearing fruit, homeboy, put your water elsewhere, dog. I don't know if he said it that way, but to me,
that was the sentiment.
Yeah,
that was the sentiment.
Exactly. That was the intention.
And we can, we also can learn so much. That's what gets me really excited about being a person who has access to certain spaces because of education and professional experience. But like figured out a way to do it, or maybe kept a commitment to doing it uh, with a grassroots approach, which just means, like, for me, I have the benefit of I have had the benefit, like, professionally, of really opening, like, pathways to solutions that might have not had a pathway, if someone like me or others don't go into government, or don't go into certain spaces and institutions that have certain kinds of power to make things happen at scale. But the particularly, like, marginalized communities, if that's a fair term, right? I think about, like, all my clients, queer children and their families, or folks who have been touched by the criminal punishment system, cannabis folks, right? Like, all of these folks who have had to waymake at the margins of what's considered to be normed in society, right? And so I think there's so much creativity and ingenuity, because the systems have not worked, or have actively worked against these populations of folks. These communities have found ways to waymake and problem solve in their lives. And it's, you look at the pandemic, for example, we were crippled, but for things like mutual aid, where communities of folks were able to activate outside of the structures of government aid, and those kinds of things, because those systems were simply crippled. They just couldn't respond. And so, even, like, on my own block, right, where we had like a senior food delivery, a prescription delivery program, where literally it was like a WhatsApp group, and trade-offs by hanging things on the door to make sure, like, seniors were able to have access to the things that they needed, when no one was felt safe going outside in those early days, right? And so many other programs that started simply because people who were invisible, recognizing other people who were invisible and in need, and figuring out a way to meet those needs. That's happened time in memoriam, right? Like, that is where some of our best macro ideas have come from. So I think part of what we got to do is recognize that people have the capacity to save themselves, and so how do we honor, recognize, acknowledge, and facilitate that?
That is so true. Wow. The capacity to save themselves. People do have that shit. And the way you put it, I love it, and I'm inspired by it, because the truth of the matter is, it's confidence and inspiration. That's how you do it. You give a better picture of tomorrow. I just talked to my wife about this very thought yesterday, because I was struggling with this concept of disability access to education, ADA compliances, disability resource center normatives, and how does a severely disabled person even engage in education at this point, right? And then how does one then advocate when something isn't going on the benefit side of that person that is utilizing, this system of disability resources, right? And the frustration of it. And the fact of the matter is, you have the power to advocate for yourself. You just have to change that perspective of action, where instead of, like, I still take it personally. Don't get me wrong. I still have my emotions, and I put in those steps that, my doctors and my wife, who's my caregiver, supports me in that effort of constantly doing the work, right? It's like you said, it's not a transaction. Anything in life, honestly, that's worth doing, it's not a transaction. It's a continual progress and process. In establishing in children development, right? The confidence is to speak openly, to feel heard and listened to, observed, and validated in whatever regard. It doesn't matter. I truthfully and honestly believe that it doesn't matter the struggle, as long as we approach it with the same bedside manner. as a person that practiced medicine back in the day, right? I always approach the problem with the same bedside manner. What is the problem and what is the emotions? What is the objective, subjective? And I should said subjective first because, the whole SOAP note is written SOAP, not any other way around. So it's kind of engaging where, we have these conversations that I think are more interesting than us circling and the ad hominem and the attacks and I'm like, dude, like what is the actual problem? Because it feels like we're fighting amongst ourselves as children over what biscuit we gotta grab, but mom and dad didn't make more biscuits. I'm like, hey, why don't we just maybe tell mom and dad I'm gonna get a paper route, I'm gonna go to the grocery store and get more flour, and do you mind, because I don't have the recipe, give me the recipe for more biscuits because I'm done fighting my brother over this. You know what I mean? No, I love that approach. People have the capacity to save themselves. So let's move on a little bit on the Revel. Let's move on to the Revel a little bit more. How did On the Revel get started, and what is the purpose of On the Revel? And if you don't mind me asking, I don't really know what a chief impact officer is. I'm guessing that means, effectiveness, but I'm just throwing shit out there.
Yeah. So On the Revel started back in 2016. The brainchild of the brother and sister that never should have been, but we're glad became Lulu and Jacoby. Both Lulu and Jacoby have sort of strong New York connections professionally and personally. But Lulu is originally from Oregon, Jacoby from Colorado. And so, they had done some work in the sort of tech and entrepreneurship fields, respectively, here in New York. And of course, back then we sort of saw the burgeoning energy around building a legal cannabis market here. They, being back in Oregon and Colorado, specifically, had front row seats to the way in which the new markets had developed there, and I think saw a space in the conference ancillary service space. Jacoby always tells the story that everything was male, pale, and stale. And so thinking about this, this active, and that's the business conference scene, right? Like it had sort of entered into that phase, right? And so that's a part of any market, trade shows, B2C stuff, and you build that kind of ecosystem when you're building any kind of new market. And so they knew what was at stake here in New York, and I think also had a good sense of the richness of the legacy community, if you will, but also knew that, talk about bridging gaps again, that there is certain legal market information that there's a knowledge base there that you have to have or have access to in order to make that transition and to operate. It's not a seamless transition from the legacy market to a regulated market. So the idea was, how do they start building that base here in New York? I think part of it was for them, how do they just meet those people and get those people to meet each other? Very simple, right? So it started as the Cannabis Tech Meetup Group, which we're so grateful that name lasted only a few months. But it was this really informal, folks who were mainly connected because of the tech world, but who also were cannabis people. And I think it quickly evolved and grew into something a lot more concrete and specific when it comes to building a platform for this community of people to really seed the New York market, for lack of a better term. So I came along in 2019, like I said, as a presenter, if you will. The theory is, like I said, on the Revel is a portmanteau of On the Level, and revelry. So the idea is you're going to come to a Revel event, and we're going to be straight up with you, right? We're going to be straight up on the promise, but we're also going to be straight up on the struggle and the realities. And that's where really getting folks who we trust and who we know share our values, but who also are experts in the field to come and share their knowledge, to really throw down game, as we like to call it, and put people on game. But also, we're going to do it in an environment where you don't feel like you have to change. And as a matter of fact, like, you're going to want to come here. We're going to cultivate and curate an environment where you're going to meet some dope people, and you're going to feel like you found your cannabis home. Like, we don't have all of the answers, but what we can assure people is that if you need a first stop to kind of figure out what your questions are, and then make a plan to get them answered so that you can make your dreams a reality, then come to On the Revel. So we've been building ourselves and our business along with the industry. You know, we started with Business of Cannabis conference, is really about broad education, market education. We've since devolved into our block party, which is our love letter to the community, but also our effort to educate and destigmatize those who are completely unfamiliar with cannabis and who may have very strong feelings because of criminalization, to show that we can be responsible community stewards, and the industry can be responsible community stewards. We launched Dope Service, which is, like any other industry, you have to model giving back to community. So it's our opportunity to gather our cannabis community together and do some good works in and around New York City. And we also launched our Buyers Club, which is New York's first cannabis trade show. And so everything we do, we're both modeling what it looks like for the industry to mature, and we're maturing sort of in lockstep. But we also use everything as a teaching tool, right? We have new entrepreneurs, new retail folks, specifically in New York, who've never owned a business before, let alone a cannabis business. And so while we're having a trade show, that's a functional piece of a market, right? How do sellers meet buyers and do business? We also have to teach these folks like how to engage and do that. So for us, we approach everything in terms of building blocks. So we make sure that the uninitiated can come in and leave with a very strong knowledge base for how to move and operate in the industry. So that's what we do at On the Revel, and I just really put a lot of effort and energy into thinking about how do we grow our business in a way that ensures that the work that we do continues to have enduring impact on that North Star I mentioned earlier, which is having a really strong, robust, sustainable industry.
Wow. So that you guys have really put together the encompassing aspects of how to initiate, begin, establish, and move forward, which is, to me, the some of the most important aspects and confusion of how to get involved in cannabis. How do you, like you mentioned it, how do you buy in bulk, right? Like how do we have, like, I would love to know.
What is the seed to sale tracking system? Like,
Whoa.
what, like,
Yeah.
what, yeah, like, all of that.
Yeah, what are the licensing, and like I could only imagine like how difficult it is, because then you have to incorporate the whole concept of banking, and I know that's a frustration point for a lot of people.
Real estate. I mean, you name
zoning.
like,
You brought up zoning, and
municipal engagement. Yeah, I mean, just really like, we structure our talks like TED Talks. So the idea is that it isn't people definitely show up with like their notebooks ready to take notes, but the idea is that we give people 10 minutes or so on a particular topic, and then we give exposure to those experts in various other ways, whether it be digitally, opportunities for one-on-ones, so on and so forth, so that people can, again, just start to issue spot like what they need to get further educated on. The subject matter here is so vast. I mean, we have lawyers coming who are like, I'm thinking about transitioning into cannabis practice. We have, legacy folks who are like, I'm trying to make a determination about whether I want to keep doing what I'm doing now or transition into getting a license, or maybe when I should do that. We have like investors that are like, hey, this seems like I got a little bit of money. This seems like something that I could park some of it, and so we have a wide range of like folks who are coming in. We say from the can of curious to the can of expert and everyone in between. So it's impossible for us to like sort of customize every experience to every person. But I think what people respond to is there's enough breadth in our offerings that they can connect, ask enough questions, meet enough people to follow that thread after the event on their own. And that's kind of how we approach what we offer. Because again, like I said, we see ourselves as a part of a bigger ecosystem. There are other people who are doing knowledge gap work, who are working more specifically in specific areas of the market. We consider all of them, again, if they have the same values, to be core partners and collaborators. So you'll see from us a lot of what we call horizontal relationships. And so much of that is just because we've built ourselves, like I said, to be a bit of a clearinghouse, both for people looking to connect with community and community looking to connect with the industry.
That's awesome. That is so exciting because that is one of my biggest fears. I've thought about, cannabis. I talk quite a bit about cannabis. I'm not gonna lie. It's got, at the beginning, I would say honestly, we started the show quite some years ago. I think we're in our 10th or 11th year producing. So initially we really hyper focused on just the conversation of veterans, the tone at the time, and the relationships, the brotherhood, that camaraderie, and then the angsts, and then applying a bit of comedic relief, right? But in 2015 I hit a breaking point with my pharmaceutical experience. It was a very difficult one for me, where I was at a loss because I believed fundamentally into the Western medicine concepts and its applications. And man, as soon as I went down that cannabis train and spoke openly, like even, with my friends, my family, that you brought it up, the stigmatization was so harsh. And I remember doing an episode, I think it was called Don't Believe the Stigma, or Stigmas Kill, or something like that. And the whole concept of the conversation was, if we're to proliferate a concept where we want to help, we want, you said it again, connect with the community connect with the public, we have to come to a level of agreement of standard acceptance, openness. You said breath, into the conversation. And that's very inspirational, because to me, without breath, we're not having a conversation. We're having a reaction, right? And that's what I experienced in 2015. I made some great people down at the Cannabis Cup in Denver, I believe it was, and went to the entrepreneurial side of it, and met Sue Sisley, great veteran advocate Roger Martin before he passed. And it was amazing. I almost met Snoop Dogg and everybody, but fire alarms went off, and I was like, nah, I'm not going inside a place. I was like, I'm good. Okay. I did get to meet the Super Troopers. They were amazing. And, it was a great experience. But when I came home, I was just so inspired to just advocate for cannabis solely and wholly on the point of, I don't want to say self-sacrifice, but to the extent of, hey, why aren't we talking about this shit as a viable thing for people like me, man? You know what I mean? Like, at the time, I wasn't so engaged about equity or, demographics or, other people's problems, because I was just so deep in mine. We just recently gone homeless. We just recently got a new house. We went through the whole troubles of what people speak about with veterans and families and issues, right? And it got to the point where I just got up and said no more. I'm going to advocate for cannabis openly. I'm going to discuss it to the point where I'm going to see that change, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn how to change people's minds. Like as stupid as that sounds, I'm going to learn how to change my voice. I'm going to edit myself. I'm going to learn how to edit the show better. I'm going to write better. I'm going to research more. And to the point where, I just started talking to more and more people about cannabis. And so a lot of guys and people think, like this is a cannabis only show. I'm like, no, like go back further. The catalog's there, bro. Like click the next page, right? But it's important to focus on these important transitions in society where as On the Revel has established a safe haven to have these kind of communities, which when I was, 5 was, oh shit, that's almost 10 years ago, 2015. Wow. So let's say that time frame, if I had, like you said, a cannabis home, a safe haven to learn, because of course I was like, hey man, what if we developed a product for, the veteran community, right? And, better people than myself with a better team and a clear vision, they've, definitely done so. And I'm like always sitting back like, man, what if, how do, and so to know that there's resources like On the Revel and these engaging events, which sound fun. To me, it sounds like a good place to not only go and kind of let your hair down and engage with good community and, that camaraderie, that sense of what I missed, from the military was, we have the same purpose, right? Purpose is very valuable to humanity as a whole. And without it, we get lost. Okay. We get lost. We find ourselves in different holes of depressions and angsts and, all that teenage woes. But to see that On the Revel is engaging on the level that you guys are, right? It's fucking fun. It's awesome. Like I was looking at a few of the pictures and I want to see some more of the videos and stuff. And I'm like, all right, we got to get engaged more as a society on the stigmas that kind of create that dissonance. Like at the moment in 2015, it was cannabis for a lot of my friends and family, even my wife, she was like, no, I don't like it, because her fundamental beliefs. And those are the roots of a lot of arguments, the quote unquote philosophical issues of the time where we really want to engage in argument, but maybe people don't, a lot of people don't. And I love that you do, because it seems to me that you have the not only the position, but the composition of character to have those arguments in such a way where you're not painting it as if you're cutting people off or funneling, which I see a lot of the heavier cannabis, production agencies and larger production stuff. Everybody's going to make that money. Don't get me wrong. And if you have money, it's easier to make more money, right? But like you bring in those legacy producers, those legacy farmers, the legacy, even medical cannabis in the state of California, to me, has shifted so much since the 2016 AMLU Act, or Adult Marijuana Use Act. I think it was, I may be chopping that shit up. I'm sorry. But that thing shifted the Prop 215, which was, since 1995, in such a way where it's not beneficial to be a medical patient at all, right? It's just an extra step. Like when I go to a dispensary now and I'm like, yeah, I'd like to purchase, ... Well, do you have your medical card? I'm like, yeah, of course I do. Okay, well, actually, I need to see you over here at this register. And okay, let's do your ID. And here we go. It's a long form process of getting a 25% discount if I'm lucky, right? And then the compounding of, oh, well, we can't, because you're a disabled veteran, we can't add the 2%. So then the taxes, Jesus Christ, right? Oh, man, I don't engage in consumer level purchasing because it's financially it's wrecking, right? So I learned how to grow, and that's what I very much loved about your approach to this. People have the capacity to save themselves. So I started growing. And that passion went from, hey, I really like growing cannabis to I really like growing cannabis and I really like breeding different strains. All right, cool, dude. Like also I really like, soil development and I'm very intrigued by long processes of the ecosystem within the biodome of this plant soil, and how to get my purple sticky punch, like Pauly Shore said in that movie Biodome, to be the best purple sticky punch, right? How do I get that fruity flavor, those terpenes, in that smack in the face gas, right? Like, I love weed, okay? And to me, it's more than just the effect. It's the relationship to the plant. You're nurturing it. You're learning from it. It's learning from you. You're learning with your environment. You're learning about the sun, and the Farmer's Almanac actually starts making fucking sense, and moon phases and shit and solstices, and you're like, wait a minute, am I turning fucking weird?
Well, no, right? I mean, it's a beautiful story, because look at, we talk about unlocking, or closing the knowledge gaps, or unlocking the base of knowledge to so many folks and communities, like that being a harm or prohibition, and like something that we have to be restorative about in our legalization effort in this moment. But even your personal story, right? Like I picked up, you're like, yeah, like I saw this problem, this access problem. And so, yeah, I have an opportunity to grow my own, and then look at all this stuff this inquiry that you went on, just simply based on like solution, problem solving something in your life, right? Like, it's not that, okay, now I grew weed because, I like to smoke and I want to consume and I need like better access and cheaper access. But it then unlocked all this inquiry into soil and the sun and growing methodologies and all these kinds of things. And like that, it can be so true in so many different areas, right? Like, we have people coming to us. It's like these guys, they came to our event, and one of our events, and they just got fascinated in like the security piece of it. They're like, oh, there's this whole like cottage industry or ancillary industry around like security and event security and those kinds of things. And we were like, well, that actually these new regulations require, certain levels of security, at retail locations, at certain other locations, delivery, et cetera. And so they sort of birthed an idea for security services out of that. I think these are people who just like probably showed up because it was a cannabis forward educational event that was consumption friendly, right? Mm-hmm. But that to me has been like that's why I get so excited about cannabis. I work across so many issue areas. And people are like, well, how does this fit, right? And I'm like, it's the most exciting thing, because we don't even know how much we don't know, and now we have opportunity to like, in the context of building this new industry, unlock a whole lot of new lines of inquiry. And to me, like, that's the human existence, staying curious, right? Beginner's eyes, and never sort of resting in the fact that we have all the knowledge that we're ever going to have. The joy is being able to discover these new questions, like new interest, new curiosities, that I think like keep us as a human race, like more focused on the things we should be focused on and less focused on how to, sort of tearing each other down or fighting over the biscuit, as I think you, that's what you analogized to earlier, right?
Yeah. I did, because in the veteran community, we talk about the crab trap. Okay. And essentially, the reason why crabs can't get out of the trap is because everybody else is too busy pulling each other down. And it's a very cool concept, but of course I love the biscuit because I feel like that draws to the more emotionability of trying to figure it out as a family, where the crab trap just seems very dark. Okay. But it's so true, right? Like, if we approach these problems with these beginner's eyes, right? That curiosity, that constant curiosity of development, and human nature, I believe, is fundamentally drawn to that. I'm not going to say population societies aren't, because again, let's look at a lot of the older stories. You know what I mean? Shit, we could just talk about 2001, right? When Dre and the Chronic 2001 came out, and there was a huge shift in just music, right? In hip hop, instead of that gangster rap, it was like, man, here's some just dope shit. And as you're listening to music, and as your ears get better and new albums come out, new interests and new sounds and tonalities, and I am equally as passionate with music as I am with cannabis. And the fundamental belief in new art that I have is the same with entrepreneurial spirit, with humanity, right? We can make a slapper, like E40 would say, right? That would just bring the community together, right? Like that East and West, I remember it so vividly as a kid, because it was one of those, intriguing moments in hip hop and music, and that animosity that it brought into the art form was a deliberate correspondence to personal choices, right? Of the leadership within that communities. And I see that resonating in a lot of different aspects of societal complexities and nuances, the minutia of the world, right? And I just believe profoundly that society at one point in time will be done with fighting over the biscuit. I'm just, like you said, I think we're going to become exhausted, and the presentation of ill solutions that are constantly coming from, I would say it's a top-down heavy type of belief system, where this top-down system is incapable of incorporating the concepts of what the persons on the grounds are actually faced with, right? Like, how do we actually engage with the people, not necessarily at the bottom, but the people that are limited to the fundamental understandings of what their experiences are. You know what I mean? All right, so I think we got to get wrapping it up. Correct? I just saw your chat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do. Unfortunately.
I just want to get some plugs out, and we'll get your social media. Such a great fucking conversation. I would love to continue this at another time when you have more time. Of course, I would love to get more updates. So how do we keep in touch with you, Jason Starr, at On the Revel?
Sure. I am at Jason E. Starr, JASONESTARR on all of the socials, Twitter, Instagram. I think Facebook still exists, but don't try to find me there. And LinkedIn, of course. And then, of course, we are at On the Revel, ONTHEREVEL. On all the platforms. Instagram's the best to stay up to date with all of our events. We also do a lot of elevation and shout outs to all of our New York fam. We have new brands coming online, new retail dispensaries coming online. Of course, we have our farmers and our processors who have been, just so hard at work seeding the market. So we love to show them some love across our socials, but especially on Instagram. And then on YouTube, On the Revel, ONTHEREVEL, we post a lot of the content from our events. And so for folks out there who are not in New York or who are in New York but haven't been able to make it out, if you want some of that great content with wonderful speakers, great experts, all of that is free for the taking on our YouTube page. So you can kind of create your own course, if you will, and get some of that good game, as we call it, right from the comfort of your own electronic device.
Internet, hello. Alltså jag örsnar mot det och när ni ska finna mig kapsen och det är bäst att jag ska bara shit.
Well, I need to